number of small, violent attacks. But these are skirmishes, only meant to delay the Canadians' assault on the mountain strongholds, Leonforte, Osoro, and Agira, protecting the German escape route through the port of Messina at the northeastern tip of Sicily.
The idea was to probe the high ground between two hilltop towns to see if the enemy were holding it in any strength. We drew enemy fire, and Cameron, our lead scout, was hit. It was then that the German sniper opened up on us. A couple of bullets sang overhead in quick succession, and we took to our heels. Norton got it right through the stomach. He fell forward, dropping his rifle. Norton was dying, and he knew it. I tried to cheer him up by saying we'd soon have him back to a doctor. But he merely said, "I'm finished, sir."
By July 17th, the Canadian advance came to a sudden halt. They had reached a series of positions where the Germans had decided to take a stand. As usual, they picked the very best spots, and there was none more formidable than Osoro.
In its 1,000-year history, Osoro has never been successfully attacked. Standing on a mountain ridge 900 meters high, it forms with the other fortress towns along the ridge, Leonforte and Agira, a formidable defensive position. As the Canadians approach Osoro, the Germans look down confidently from the heights.
This is the peak overlooking Osoro village, and from here you can see the Canadian battlefield of July 17th to 23rd, 1943. The Germans had set up a defensive position from that little mound over there, which is Leonforte, across this ridge and into Osoro. But the real thing you notice here is the advantage of observation. The German spotters from any one of these positions could see anything that moved. Their main focus was on the road, because that's where the armor's going to come. But they could even pick off a man in an orchard.
The town of Osoro appeared to be virtually impregnable. So it must have seemed to our commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Sutcliffe, when he received the order to mount the attack. Sutcliffe set out to make his reconnaissance. He and our intelligence officer, Maurice Cocken, made their way to a forward observation post. Sutcliffe and Cocken crouched in the open, map boards in front of them and binoculars leveled, the lenses winking in the sun as they anxiously scanned the mighty battlements looming ahead of them. They did not realize that they were being regarded in their turn. Up on the Osoro Scarp, the German crew of an 88 lay their gun over open sights. Seconds later, Sutcliffe lay dead, and Cocken dying. This fired us with rage against the enemy. This killing before the battle had been joined seemed singularly vicious, almost obscene.
We're on the eastern slope of Osoro, and from here you can see the peak, which is about 2,700 feet in the air, and you can see the ruins of the Norman castle. The Canadian plan was really quite simple, or simple in statement, very difficult in execution. What they were going to do is make a night attack by single file, filing through these hills, across this gully over here, climbing this incredibly steep rock face, and then surprising the Germans. To me, this idea was fantastic, because if it worked, it was great. But if the Germans caught on to them, they were going to be annihilated. So basically, through the night, the Canadians came up. There was about a group of 40 men just carrying machine guns, rifles, ammunition, the simple stuff. And they led the assault up this rise.
On and on we went, until about 0400. Under the pallid light of the late-rising crescent moon, we scaled the final ridge and were appalled to find the base of the mountain wall looming sheer above. During the climb that followed, each of us performed his own private miracle. From ledge to ledge, we oozed upward like some vast mold. Those who faltered clung with straining muscles till someone heaved from behind or hauled them from above. Weapons were passed up hand to hand, and no man dropped so much as a clip of ammunition, which was as well, for any sound would have been fatal to us all.
These are the ruins of the Norman castle overlooking Osoro village. And it was here that the Hasty Peas made the most brilliant assault of the entire Sicilian campaign. At about 4 a.m., the assault group of the Hasty Peas reached this crest over here, and they managed to overwhelm a small German garrison. And within 10 minutes, the whole peak here was in Canadian hands.
Private A.K. Long jumped to catch the lip of what seemed to be the next terrace and disappeared above me. Then, with horrifying abruptness, the silence was destroyed with the barking of a Tommy gun. With a convulsive effort, I clawed at the rim and hauled myself over the top. The crumbling wall of the ancient castle loomed close at hand. Directly in front of me, and only a few feet distance, A.K. Long was down on one knee, with his Tommy leveled at 3 German privates, standing as rigid as store dummies. Sprawled at their feet lay an artillery sergeant, the first man to die that day, upon the crest of Mount Osoro.
More Hasty Peas came up to the point where they had 500 men here ready to hold off the Germans. The assault was only one part of their problem, because once they were here, they were not only above the Germans, but behind them. And they knew that the Germans could not allow this to stay that way. So they had to come after them. You can come over here, you can see where the Germans were. There's the village of Osoro. So you can imagine the fear in the Germans when all of a sudden the firing from behind them starts. So they started to call in their artillery from all these surrounding ridges. They were firing rockets. But nonetheless, the Hasty Peas dug in, or as best they could around here, because it's all rock, and held on. But you can see why this position was so important, because being behind the Germans, it forced their positions at Leonforte and Osoro to be evacuated.
The Canadians have come up behind German lines and now look down on the Germans at Osoro, threatening the defensive line between Leonforte, Osoro, and Agira.
The battle was not yet half an hour old, and already the Germans were counterattacking. The world exploded in an appalling cacophony of sound and fury. The grass plateau, on which nearly 500 men were now crowded, virtually vanished under a mounting pall of dust and smoke, shot through with malevolent tongues of flame. The fury of the barrage was paralyzing. I lay flat on my belly behind a section of stone fence, scrabbling at the rock-hard ground with my tin hat in a frenzied attempt to burrow into the heart of the mountain. Shortly thereafter, we heard an upsurge of vehicle noise. The Germans were giving up Osoro.
All day, the Germans desperately counterattack, trying to regain the heights, but the Canadians hang on, and with their defensive line broken, the Germans have no choice but to retreat. The Hasty Peas have revenged the death of their commander, Bruce Sutcliffe. The fortress town of Osoro has fallen to the Canadians, but the German army is determined to escape from Sicily to Italy at the port of Messina, and they tried to delay the Canadians at Leonforte and Agira. After a vicious battle, the Canadians capture Leonforte. Pursuing the retreating Germans, they fight their way towards yet another hilltop fortress at Agira. Here the Germans put up a desperate last-minute resistance. But then they retreat from the town. The Canadians move in. Agira is liberated. In 4 weeks, fighting in Sicily, the Canadians have suffered over 2,000 casualties, including 562 dead.
This is the grave of Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Crowe. He was the CO of the Royal Canadian Regiment, and during the action at Nisseria, he was cut down by a hail of German machine gun bullets. He was killed in action July 24th, 1943. The personal inscription reads, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." Ralph Crowe was 31 years old. This is the grave of Private Sidney John Cousins from Manitoba. He served with the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, and during the heavy fighting in Leonforte, when the Pats were being driven back by German machine gun nests, and Cousins grabbed a Bren gun and put it on his hip and attacked the Germans, killing them and driving them off, which was a terrific act of bravery. But he was killed later in the day. Killed in action, July 22nd, 1943, aged 23. The battle for Sicily lasted 38 days, and it was a great success for Canada. Our troops showed that they could match the best the Germans had, and they could function under very difficult circumstances. But most importantly, they got battle experience at quite a cost, as this cemetery can attest. And this experience was going to come in very handy in the next operation, the invasion of Italy.
In Agira, the Canadians hold a concert in the main square to celebrate their victory, the first one in liberated Europe, and it seems like an Allied triumph. But the Germans in Sicily have achieved their main objective. Retreating across the Strait of Messina, their army of 60,000 men has been saved to fight again in Italy. Just 4 weeks later, the campaign continues. The Canadians and the Allies invade mainland Italy. The Allied invasion has led to the overthrow of the fascists, and the new Italian government now surrenders. The Italian army ceases to fight. But Italy is still occupied by hundreds of thousands of German troops. And turning on their former Italian allies, the Germans decide to turn all of Italy into a battleground. Blowing up bridges and mining roads to delay the Allied advance. The Allied plan is to drive north up the coast, past the city of Ortona, encircle Rome, and seize the capital by the end of the year. As the Canadians push north through town after town to Campobasso, everywhere they are treated by the Italians as liberators. But the retreating Germans stop at river crossings and mountain passes to fight stubborn rearguard actions. And the Canadians in their first 3 months on the Italian mainland suffer 300 dead and thousands of wounded. As casualties rise, the 1st Canadian Division calls for reinforcements.